President Trump recently sent CIA Director Mike Pompeo to Pyongyang.
His mandate was certainly to ascertain whether or not the North Koreans were really serious.
Kim Jong-un wants this picture, a picture with a sitting president, which to them confers legitimacy about the Kim family dynasty.
The president is buoyed by the idea that a meeting could take place, that it could be historic.
From the first meeting to an actual agreement, that's going to be a long process.
It'll be interesting to see the extent to which he demands the U.S. take steps in order to satisfy his requirements about denuclearization.
From the Voice of America, this is Washington Talk.
Hello and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-jung Cho. President Donald Trump says the U.S. will be doing everything possible to make an upcoming meeting with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un a worldwide success. President Trump recently sent CIA Director Mike Pompeo to Pyongyang and got enough assurance that productive negotiations are possible. How much progress can President Trump and Kim Jong-un make when they sit down for talks?
Mike Pompeo is extraordinary. Had a great meeting with Kim Jong-un and got along with him really well, really great. If the meeting when I'm there is not fruitful, I will respectfully leave the meeting.
Now my guest today, Mr. Frank Jannuzi, president of the Mansfield Foundation and former advisor to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Also joining us today, Mr. Phillip.J. Crowley, professor at George Washington University. Mr. Crowley is a former Assistant Secretary of State and the author of the book Red Line, American Foreign Policy in a Time of Fractured Politics and Failing States. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. PJ, let me begin with you. CIA Director Mike Pompeo made a top-secret visit to Pyongyang to lay the groundworks for this summit. What are the key takeaways from this visit?
I think the key takeaway is that Director Pompeo, on behalf of the president, found enough seriousness of purpose that we have more confidence that the meeting is actually going to take place. And obviously, it is unusual to start a negotiating process at the leadership level. There are some great risks involved in this. But I think he got assurance, first and foremost, that North Korea is prepared to talk about denuclearization. Where we go from there will depend a lot on the tenor of the meeting when President Kim and President Trump do meet.
Frank, other than just getting the assurances on denuclearization, would Director Pompeo have touched upon the key agendas and sort of started the negotiations?
I think his mandate was certainly not to negotiate anything, but to ascertain whether or not the North Koreans were really serious. During the second term of the Obama administration, they had set up this rather high bar, demanding that North Korea take certain concrete steps to sort of prove their seriousness about the willingness to discuss denuclearization, really almost as a precondition to having those negotiations take place at all. I think that the Trump administration, having lowered that bar a little bit, wanted to see face-to-face that there really was a commitment from Kim Jong-un to talk about denuclearization and complete denuclearization. I think that Pompeo probably also expressed other priorities of the Trump administration, and certainly retrieving the 3 imprisoned Americans will be among those priorities. Addressing the ballistic missile threat, which is linked to the nuclear issue, but not identical with the nuclear issue, I think is another priority. And I'm sure that Pompeo would have communicated those agenda items.
I mean, there's a lot still to figure out here. First and foremost, where will the meeting take place? And certainly the location of the meeting will say a lot about the complex politics surrounding this. I mean, President Trump has already given Kim Jong-un something of enormous significance. Kim Jong-un wants this picture. I think Donald Trump probably wants this picture as well. From Kim's standpoint, this is something that leaders of North Korea have sought, for decades. A picture with a sitting president, which to them confers legitimacy about the Kim family dynasty, if you will. Now, President Trump is attracted to this idea of a historic meeting. It's never taken place before. But now, it gets really complicated. Where does this meeting take place? And I think, for example, were it to take place in Pyongyang, conservatives in the United States will be very, very concerned about that. And so, if it's in some place neutral like Geneva and Stockholm, you have a practical issue. How does President Kim get there, right? President Xi would love to have this meeting in Beijing. It could be at the DMZ, probably my guess. Where this meeting ultimately takes place will tell you a lot about the confidence on both sides, and that confidence will be crucial to how much can be achieved in this first meeting and in subsequent negotiations.
Frank, President Trump is showing great optimism after Pompeo's trip to Pyongyang, saying that we can now solve a world problem. He's also mentioning about respect and goodwill on both sides. At the same time, he's saying that he would walk out of the meeting if it turned out to be unfruitful.
Yes.
So what is President Trump's strategy here?
Well, I think on the one hand, that the president is buoyed by the idea that a meeting could take place, that it could be historic, and that he could be the president who draws an end to this long chapter from the Cold War. But the really hard work is not to get the first meeting. The hard work is going to be with what comes afterwards in attempting to try to put some skin on the bones of a deal that may be very basic and rooted only in some rough principles. The basic concept is a sort of peace for denuclearization. That's been true since the agreed framework of 1994. But getting from where we are to where we need to be is actually a very long journey, and the president wants to accomplish things quickly. I think President Trump's optimism is informed by at least a little bit of realism about the difficulties ahead, and I think that's why he's leaving himself a little bit of room to walk away and return to a maximum pressure strategy if the first meeting goes poorly.
PJ, when President Trump and Kim Jong-un sit down together, how much progress could they make in terms of denuclearizations and concessions?
I think for the two leaders, there's a fundamental question on both sides. The details, as Frank said, of how you get from the first meeting to some sort of framework agreement and then down the road to an actual agreement, that's going to be a long process. That process would take at least months, if not years. So first, from Trump's standpoint, are you in fact willing to give this capability up? Now, from Kim Jong-un's standpoint, what's his interest? Survival. So he's going to want security guarantees. He's going to want a lot of economic investment. And so he will say, I have this capability, whatever it is. I'm willing to give that up, but what are you willing to provide me in return?
The South Koreans report that the North Koreans have told them that U.S. troops could be an acceptable presence on the peninsula after a peace agreement.
Right.
And this is a bit of a shift in the public position of the North. Those of us who have dealt with the North for many years know that they have actually talked about this for decades. That
what
the
they're
U.S.
prepared to do.
But they weren't. Yeah. But this speaks to the growing confidence of Kim Jong-un that he's willing to talk about denuclearization, and he's not establishing up front a precondition that all those U.S. forces are going to have to be gone as part of a deal.
PJ, Frank just mentioned about North Korea not asking for the pullout of the U.S. troops from South Korea. What are the considerations for the United States here? Is this connected to the U.S. military presence in Asia? Absolutely.
I mean, long term, Frank mentioned the word confidence, and this is fundamental. If North Korea is going to open up, under what circumstances, and for this would be very unusual for an autocratic or dictatorial regime. And even if you look at China right next door, we are 50 years into this process, and Xi is still engaged in this complicated aspect of having a market economy and an autocratic regime. Will North Korea follow the Chinese model? Will it follow the South Korean model? Will it try to follow its own model? But I think central to this is this question of confidence. Is Kim Jong-un confident that his country can open up to some degree and not risk his job as leader of North Korea?
Yeah, Frank.
That will be crossing a Rubicon that probably his father didn't cross that path, and his grandfather neither of them did.
Right, Frank. North Korea telling the South Koreans beforehand that it will not ask for the pullout of the U.S. troops from South Korea. Would this somehow drive a wedge between U.S. and South Korea, or act as an increased pressure on the U.S. side to come up with more concessions?
I don't see this being a problem in terms of driving a wedge. Long term, the key for the United States is that the troop presence on the Korean Peninsula should be negotiated between the U.S. and our South Korean allies. And it really shouldn't be a subject on which the North Koreans get a vote. But for sure, we know the North Koreans have traditionally been wary about the U.S. presence. They've found it to be threatening. It'll be interesting to see whether Kim Jong-un, when he talks about denuclearization, the extent to which he demands the U.S. take steps in our force posture in Asia, globally, the targeting of our ICBMs, the deployment of strategic assets to the peninsula, in order to satisfy his requirements about denuclearization. I think that'll be part of the negotiations.
But I think it may be fairly. I won't say any of this is going to be easy, but I think it's certainly achievable that on both sides you can figure out what each needs. The United States will want to be able to verify that there are no nuclear weapons, and want them to kind of eliminate missiles that potentially threaten the United States. On the North Korean side, it might want a peace treaty. It might want some sort of security assurance that regime change is not the policy of the United States. I mean, you can get to those principles.
But it's always been about the sequencing.
And then it's absolutely about the sequencing. And I think here's where the obstacle from an American standpoint will be as much American politics, as it is the substance of the negotiation. And here we have to look at the Iran nuclear deal, right? So to me, if you get to an actual agreement, it's going to look a lot like the Iran nuclear deal. And the challenge for President Trump will then be, in some way, how is Pyongyang all of a sudden trustworthy in ways that Tehran was not?
Well, on that point, we'll end this discussion here and watch video for our next discussion.
존경하는 리설주 요사께서는 당과 정부의 간부들과 함께 출연자들의 공연 성과를 열렬히 축하하시고 그들에게 따뜻한 인사를 보내시었습니다.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has increasingly shared the public stage with his wife in recent months. She was also recently given a new title, Respected First Lady, an upgrade from Comrade. Is her promotion part of efforts to paint North Korea as a normal state? Now, Frank, 리설주 is given a new title, Respected First Lady. Is this part of efforts to promote her status before the upcoming summitry?
You know, it seems to me like Kim Jong-un is engaged in giving North Korea a makeover. You look at his work on the miracle street of modern apartment complexes, the swimming complexes, the ski resorts. This is a youthful, vigorous leader, or at least that's the image he wants to project to the world. And he's a distinctly modern North Korean leader. He draws on the legacy of his grandfather. Many people say that he resembles physically his grandfather. But he's projecting a modern, young, youthful image to the world. And I think having a wife by his side, attractive, modern, educated, smart, engaged, is consistent with a modern head of state image. And so I really see this as part of a larger process. And I think that it does suggest that she may have a close advisory role, closer than we may have known up till now, and that family comes first. And that's something on which he and President Trump can agree on, I think.
PJ, is North Korea trying to present itself as a normal state?
Well, I think they will. I mean, if you go back to the 1980s and the emergence of Mikhail Gorbachev and his wife Raisa, it was Margaret Thatcher who said, this is a guy that we can do business with. It didn't eliminate all of the obstacles that existed at the time between the Soviet Union and the West, but that was a very significant political gesture, and then we were all captivated, by Gorbachev, when he came to the United States, when he had summits, with first President Reagan, then President Bush. So I think that it is an intriguing element of this that we know so little about North Korea. Everything that we know has been carefully staged. Now I think we have to be mindful that this will be part of a broader information campaign that North Korea will try to deploy as part of this coming out.
Frank, by presenting his own sister and his wife to the international stage, would it help Kim Jong-un whitewash the image that it has?
Well, I'm so glad you raised that point because, we might be talking more about him killing his half-brother
And his uncle.
and his uncle if we weren't talking about his sister and his wife. So I don't know if he's got an image specialist there in Pyongyang who's consulting with him on how to soften
Probably a whole bureau.
Right? But this is a fairly sophisticated operation, and I think we shouldn't underestimate that this could be part of a very calculated image cleansing process. When I asked about Kim Jong-il on my first visit in 2001 to North Korea and asked about his family, I was met with the stony glances and no response. How many children does he have? How old are they? What are they like? Nothing. It was all considered to be within the realm of privacy and the cone of silence. And so this is potentially an opening to the world.
We'll end this conversation here and move on to our next segment. Now time for the photo moment, a time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. The photo today is about North Korean leader Kim Jong-un greeting Song Tao in Pyongyang, head of the Chinese Communist Party's International Liaison Department. In this photo, we can see them shaking hands with a big picture of Chinese President Xi Jinping in the background. Now, Frank, what's your reaction?
This, to me, reflects the warming of ties, the fact that Kim Jong-un went to Beijing probably at the request of Xi Jinping, and now the return envoy visit. They used to be close as lips and teeth. They're not anymore. They probably never will have that kind of tight alliance relationship. But China wants to remain relevant and even in the driver's seat on events in the peninsula. So it's telling that the relationship appears to be warming, just as Kim Jong-un is also reaching out to the U.S.
The fact that he made the meeting, he came to Beijing now, but waited 7 years into his rule, tells you that Kim is feeling more confident. Obviously, the power structure is still there. This relative strength of China, the relative weakness of North Korea. But I think this tells you that he's prepared to go into this negotiation, at a point of what he thinks is significant security. And that dynamic will have very great significance in the meeting with Moon Jae-in, the meeting with Donald Trump, and whatever follows.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Mr. Crowley, Mr. Jannuzi, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And this was Washington Talk from the Voice of America, and I'm Eun Jang Cho. Join us next week for more analysis on North Korea.